Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence here at Walden University. And today I'm going to be moderating our plenary session 3, the crisis in social science research. What are we doing, and what should we be doing? Today's plenary speaker is Dr. Richard Balkin. And we also have Dr. Kathleen Livingston from the School of Counseling on the line today, who is here to introduce Dr. Balkin. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, everybody. I am very honored to welcome Dr. Rick Balkin and to tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Balkin is a professor. He's the Assistant Department Chair of Leadership and Counselor Education and the Coordinator of Educational Research and Design in the School of Education at the University of Mississippi. He currently serves as Editor-in-Chief for the International Journal for the Advancement of Counseling. He was the editor for the Journal of Counseling and Development. That's the flagship journal for the American Counseling Association. He's been an ACA Fellow and past president for the Association for Assessment and Research in Counseling. Rick began practice as a professional counselor in 1993 and has worked in academia since 2003. Rick has over 90 publications, which includes textbooks on assessment and counseling, research, and the counseling relationship. He's published test and technical manuals, peer-reviewed manuscripts, book chapters, and conference proceedings. His counseling experience with at-risk youth was the foundation of his research agenda, which includes understanding the role of counseling and relevant goals for adolescents in crisis and counseling outcomes. This led to numerous published articles and one published measure through Mind Garden, Crisis Stabilization Scale, related to assessing and counseling at-risk youth. He co-authored a measure on life balance and for adults and adolescents. He's published in the area of religious diversity and forgiveness and developed a model and measure for counseling clients through issues of forgiveness and conflict. And to top it all off, he has a forthcoming book with Oxford University Press, Practicing Forgiveness, A Path Towards Healing. Before I turn it over to Rick, I'm going to turn it over real quickly back to Lita so she can go over some housekeeping items. Thank you so much for doing this, Rick.
Thank you, Kathleen. Just a few housekeeping items before we turn it over to Dr. Balkin. As you all know, familiar with Zoom hopefully by now, in the lower corner you should be seeing the audio settings function. If you need to adjust your audio throughout today's plenary session, you can do so by clicking on that. There is also a Q&A box that we have. Dr. Livingston will be monitoring that throughout the session, and Dr. Balkin will be addressing any questions and or comments that come in throughout the session. We do have closed captioning as well. Finally, we have a view options menu dial up on the upper part of the screen. With that, you can either exit from full screen or zoom in to get a better view of this slide. Without further ado, welcome, Dr. Balkin. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here, truly. So I thought I would talk a little bit about, before we get into kind of the crux of this slide, of what it is that happens in social science research and why I refer to it as a crisis. And I have to be honest, my original title for this presentation was The Crisis in Counseling Research. And then after talking with the folks at Walden, I realized what a broad area of interest we're going to have here. And so I wanted to make it more about social science research and generalize it. But a lot of my experiences come from the counseling field, particularly with editing journals. And, you know, I've had my thumb on counseling research since about 2006, when I started as editor of the journal Professional Counseling Practice Theory and Research. And then moved on to Counseling and Values, Measurement and Evaluation in Counseling Development, then the Journal of Counseling Development, and now the International Journal for the Advancement of Counseling. So I've been doing this for a while and seen a lot of research. And what I can tell you is that I think we're very myopic in our research. And what I mean by that is we tend to engage in a lot of navel gazing, you know, staring at our own belly buttons, You know, what do I mean? What I mean is we do a lot of me search instead of research. You know, I'll give you an example. I belong to some professional listservs, and I remember seeing a lot of research coming out on picking a single competency or ethical value and seeing if counselors are specifically trained on this single competency. There are hundreds of competencies in the counseling profession, as there are in psychology and social work and other behavioral health fields. And so when we start trying to single out a unique competency, for example, couples counseling, you know, we're trained to work with individuals, groups, families, couples, sure, but how much training happens in specifically with respect to couples counseling? If you want to find a zinger, you can, and we do. And so, particularly in this COVID environment, we're very concerned about the mental health of practitioners, and I'm seeing a lot of research there. Look, research on ourselves is very easy to get. We can go to a professional listserv, we can solicit respondents, and we can get our research done. But the problem comes in is that what we're supposed to be doing is focusing on our clients, on the people we serve. And that's much harder to do. But it's research that is much more beneficial. And so what I tend to see in our field is that we focus so much on ourselves to get the research out there, to generate productivity, but not necessarily serving our field in the best interest. And that's why I call it a crisis, right? Because we need to be serving our field. Which gets me to the second topic of quantum change. You know, and so let's talk about what quantum change is. Next slide, please. So quantum change is a major change. It's your epiphany. And if I were to ask you right now, how many epiphanies have you had? Maybe some of you all could count them on a single hand, all right? Maybe you're thinking, it's been a while since I've had an epiphany. You know, we don't have quantum change very often. You can probably think about a time when you made a major change in your life, you know, and the decisions that led you to making that major change. They don't happen often. And when they do happen, we tend to think of these quantum changes as long-lasting positive effects. But a lot of change that we solicit or elicit isn't quantum change. Change can often be short-term. When you look at the outcomes of counseling and therapy, very often we'll find that that the gains made through counseling and therapy aren't permanent changes. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. Maybe at some point in time you've tried to lose weight or get more fit. And you probably didn't just say, I'm going to get more fit and enter this slowly increasing, you know, echelon of fitness. No, you probably had some ups and downs. You probably faltered on your diet, or maybe you didn't get your exercise in very often. And maybe you made progress, but it was very slow, and slowly it creeped upward. But what we tend to find is that these changes go back and forth. Very rarely are they permanent. So quantum change is rare. But when do we have quantum change? We have quantum change when we become uncomfortable. And so I'm very much into that when we create discomfort, we'll often move to change. Next slide, please. So how do we shift? There's been lots of theories. There's lots of techniques. There's lots of interventions. I've written about this with my co-author, Jeffrey Kotler, when we looked at counseling relationships in the counselor's life. And so we often turn to our theories or our techniques. I'll give you an example. A very popular technique today in treating mental health, particularly with trauma, is EMDR. All right. Now, EMDR certification costs right now about $1,500. And there are tens of thousands of people getting trained in EMDR. It is a multi-million-dollar industry. And certainly you can find research studies that show the efficacy of EMDR. People do get better with EMDR. But when you start to look at randomized controlled trials between EMDR and viable treatment alternatives, you find that in some studies, EMDR gets better gains. But you also find in some studies that EMDR does not get better gains. In fact, the alternative therapies get better gains. So we end up with an unstable finding, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Theories and techniques generally are not the answer. In my field of counseling, we often teach counseling theories in the very first semester a student begins. And counselors across the country learn about theories, and once they're learning about theories, they're asked at the end of the semester to choose their theory and write a paper on their theory. Keep in mind, they've never seen a client. All right? They're just asked to choose a theory, what speaks to them at the moment. And then when they engage in practicum and internship, they are to implement this theory that they have chosen. They haven't even tried it out yet. So I often end up telling students, you know what? I know this seems really important. It actually doesn't matter very much. Because if you really think about it, it's not the theories and the techniques that are going to create change. And let me show you for a second. Consider for yourself, because most of y'all are either faculty already or studying to get your doctorate. Consider for a moment who your favorite teacher was. Picture that person. And I realize we can't chat back and forth, but I would bet that if I were to ask you reasons, what were the qualities of this person that was your favorite teacher? You'd probably give me responses like, this person had a lot of passion. This person really cared. This person had a funny sense of humor. This person made learning fun. This person challenged me. None of you all will likely say, you know what, I really appreciated how the teacher would write the objectives on the board before class because that helped me organize myself. Or I really thought the multiple choice tests that this teacher made were really fair and covered the material adequately. None of your responses will likely be pedagogical. Of course, I just mentioned two very important pedagogical techniques that are supposed to contribute to learning. But what you all brought into was how this person made you feel. It was the relationship. And so I'll throw to you that when we are studying change, rather than looking at change through the lens of treatment and intervention, one of the things we miss in social science research is looking at the process of change through the relationships that we engage in. And that is a significant need that we should be evaluating. What processes occur that create change, as opposed to what theories or treatments? EMDR, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But it's the process. You're telling me that in a 60 to 90 minute session, You know, what's going to determine the change is eyes moving back and forth, not the processing of trauma, not that the relationship that occurs between the counselor and the client. Very rarely are those areas actually addressed in the research. And so we really don't know what we don't know. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about replication. Consider for a moment that half of what we think we know in social science research cannot be replicated. 50% of our findings, it's estimated, cannot be replicated. Next slide. It's the open source collaboration that was first published its findings in 2015 out of the field of psychology, where they got tens of thousands of participants to participate in classic studies, finding out that we're not able to replicate these findings. We're finding out that things we took for granted, like learning styles, you know, visual, audio, and kinesthetic learning, don't really exist. That's not how those learning styles are not comprehensive. They don't show how people learn adequately. And so then the question is, well, why are we not able to replicate these findings? And one suggestion was, well, it's our sampling. You know, our sampling is too diverse. And the open source collaboration has come back and said, no, that's not it. We've got 60,000 people in these studies. We have plenty of diversity. It's not the diversity of our sample. Well, what is it then? It's likely that the things that we look at, the phenomena that we study, are highly unstable. You know, I used to work on an adolescent psychiatric unit where adolescents were all in acute care. They were a danger to self, danger to others. A lot of the teenagers I worked with dealt with drug addiction. They dealt with severe depression. They were suicidal. Some of them were involved in violent gangs. And so they were all deemed danger to self, danger to others. And I dealt with a lot of addiction. And you know what? I had a lot of varied outcomes. It was very difficult to predict who would do well in treatment and who would not. You know, by far, most of the adolescents I worked with did very well in inpatient psychiatric hospitalization. They seemed to be able to identify the problems that got to this point, process some coping skills, and commit to follow-up. And yet, when they were discharged, they had there was a lot of variability in terms of support system. There was a lot of variability in terms of the outpatient counseling resources. You know, those who struggled with drug addiction weren't necessarily welcome in AA meetings. And in rural Arkansas, all they had was AA meetings. They didn't have NA meetings. And so the support system and the infrastructure that was needed to help with the success and recovery just wasn't there. So looking at how an adolescent did an inpatient treatment wasn't a good predictor for how they would do once released, because there's so much instability in addiction. All right. And you know, think about the constructs that we look at, whether it's positive psychology or wellness, relapse prevention, achievement. All right. All of these we assume can be easily measured, but at the same time aren't necessarily stable. Resilience, grit, these are not stable constructs. One of the constructs I study is forgiveness. You know, and maybe you like to think about yourself as a very forgiving person or a very unforgiving person. And what I often tell people is you can't label yourself as that. And they go, well, why not? And I say, well, consider what would happen if your kid brought home a friend and that friend stole $20 out of your wallet. You might tell your kid, that person is never welcome in your house again. But if that person who stole $20 from your wallet was your niece or nephew, now you got to have a talk. And you have to have a talk about stealing. And you have to have a talk about your relationship and how you're going to heal this relationship. The same event occurs, but the context is different. And simply because of the change in context, you might be more willing to forgive. We see this a lot of time in marriage, versus just dating. If you're in a monogamous relationship where you're dating and the person cheats on you, you might be done. But if you've been married for 26 years, you might not be. Again, the same offense, but the construct is different. And so that's why some of our findings are often unstable, is because context really does matter. Why else might our findings be a problem? Publication. We're pressured to publish. We're pressured to collect data in very easy ways. And we want to find statistical significance because we're afraid that if we don't, it won't get published. And then I want to mention the limitations of null hypothesis statistical testing. I know I just gave some of you all nightmares, but the reality is that statistical testing is a statement of probability. What is the likelihood that this finding occurs 95 to 99% of the time? And so understand that null hypothesis statistical testing is a specific situation based on your sample, all right, for a particular effect. Next slide, please. So how can we make our research more meaningful? Well, we already do a pretty good job in talking about statistical significance. And as I said before, statistical significance is a term of probability. What is the likelihood of this effect occurring with this sample again? And we're doing a pretty good job now of talking about practical significance. Effect size. We tend to look at effect size in two ways. Sometimes we express effect size in standard deviation units. What amount of change is occurring between these groups, and we have common effect size measures like Cohen's D or Cohen's F that tell us the amount of change or amount of difference in standard deviation units. Sometimes we report practical significance or effect size in variance units. What percent of the variance is accounted for by these variables? Eta squared, R squared are examples of this. That's a lot like saying, how much of the Big Mac do I understand? Because you all know what's on a Big Mac. It's 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. If you turn it upside down, it's a bun, seed, sesame, on onions, pickles, cheese, lettuce, sauce, special patties, beef, all too. Wherever you go, wherever you do, if you get a Big Mac in Arkansas or you get a Big Mac in Wisconsin, it's going to taste the same because 100% of the variance is accounted for. It's made the same way. But if I asked each of you to make your own version of it, some of y'all may not use a sesame seed bun. Some of y'all may not know how to make the special sauce. Some of y'all might use Angus beef. Some of y'all might use sirloin. Some of y'all might use ground beef. Some of y'all may not use beef at all. And suddenly we bring error into our model so that every sandwich now has a grain, has a protein, has some vegetable matter to it, but we cannot account for all of the variance in the model. Maybe we only account for 30% of the variance in the model. And so we begin to express this. But what's funny about social science research is that we tend to use these conventions of small, medium, and large effect. And do you know what we call a large effect? about 14% of the variance accounted for. We get excited at about 14% of the variance accounted for. We call that a large effect. That means 86% of what's contributing is unknown, is error. We haven't measured. So understand that in social science research, we tend to get excited and express large relationships and large differences about minute findings. All right? And we get excited about that. And so that's just something to be aware of as you report statistical significance. So what else should we be doing? If we're also reporting statistical significance and effect size, we should be reporting the stability of our findings. And this is a newer concept, and I challenge you all to look at some resources for this. But you could Google effect size of confidence intervals. Effect size of confidence intervals, and this would take you to websites that will calculate confidence intervals for your effect size. And when you do that, when you fill in the little blanks and you'll fill in what your F value is, what your sample size or degrees of freedom were, and then what your it'll show you what your effect size is, and it'll also show you the confidence interval for them. And why do we care? Because when we see that our findings can range at any given time from a small effect to a large effect, we know that our findings are unstable and that future replication of our research might produce something different. And we need to be reporting that now as well. The transition we need to make in our field is that instead of saying statistical significance is important, and let me supplement those findings with effect size and confidence intervals of effect size, what we need to be saying is statistical significance is a facet of my report, but equally important is the effect size and the stability of this finding. All three need to be held equally, as opposed to putting statistical significance up here and everything else as a supplement to it. Next slide, please. By creating this type of research where we focus on our findings, what our findings mean, and the extent to which our findings can be replicated, we can truly create research that is more impactful. And we do this by studying processes, not just techniques. So I think that taking what we talked about in the beginning of let's quit our navel gazing, let's focus on our processes, and let's consider what are some important findings and how those can be replicated in the future. So I'm going to pause for a few minutes and see if there's any questions.
And please do enter those in the Q&A. We have the Q&A up where Dr. Balkin can address any questions or comments that you may have.
One of the resources that I have available is a resource. I have my own website. It's called balkinresearchmethods.com. And if you go to the research methods and statistics section of that, you'll see a lot of resources. And one of those resources is confidence intervals for effect size. It's at the bottom of that website. And so that's BALKIN researchmethods.com. And I wouldn't say it's a great website in terms of visually appealing, but it's got a lot of resources on it, more like a catalog. And certainly feel free to look at those materials. One of the questions I got is, isn't some of the problem you are noting rooted in our approach to teaching research, which has not been changed in many years? I am so glad you've made that comment or question. Yes. Okay, I'll give you an example. ANCOVA. I think I've come across one research study that's used ANCOVA since the time I've been editing a journal in 2006. We don't do a lot of ANCOVAs anymore. And so yes, that is definitely a problem where we are, we tend to be antiquated in what we teach. I'll give you another example. Hand calculations. I learned hand calculations. You know, and I learned how to do an ANOVA by hand. And I was taught that by doing the ANOVA by hand, I would then have a better understanding of ANOVA. But for some reason, when I started learning canonical correlation and MANOVA, I didn't necessarily do those by hand. I mean, I have computed an eigenvalue by hand for a 2-group MANOVA, but never for a 3-group MANOVA. I've never done it for a factor analysis. So at some point in time, we go, oh, the hand calculations are too complex. We don't need to know it for that. And yet we still teach them. You know, and so I think that maybe we need to look at what we teach and how we teach it and become a little bit more modern in our ideas of how we do what we do.
Rick, there's a couple more questions. Do you see
Yeah.
the question by Brian and James?
Sure. How do we address these issues you raise while also being kind to our doctoral students? They feel a similar pressure to take an easy path. For example, through CESNET. If we hold to these standards, are we able to give them tools? Well, first of all, two things. I don't want to bash the entire profession of, or the entire body of research on counselor education and counselor training, but we do too much of it. And so, you know, I really do believe that, number one, very often when I look at research on CESNET, it looks like somebody's just reinventing the wheel, that these are studies that have been done over and over and over again. And it does get a little monotonous. But two is, you know, people who get a PhD, what drew you to this? And usually it's an answer of, well, I thought there was more to know. Was it really about counselor training though? Is that what brought you to this? What do you really want to know? You know, I think the other element is we learn statistical tools, and this goes back to the previous question. We learn statistical tools that are taught by educational researchers. And who are the educational researchers? These are people who develop statistical tools based on schools, school districts, large data sets. But what do counselors do? Counselors see individuals and small groups. And we have a body of research that addresses individuals and small groups. We can do it through qualitative research, but we can also do it through single case research design, a highly underutilized process that we should be employing. And the Journal of Counseling and Development, I believe in October 2015, did a special issue on single case research design. We need to be teaching that, and we need to be teaching that in our research classes. Good research is commonly defined by journals' willingness to publish. How do we get them to change their approach and publish works that take on your recommendations? By you all becoming reviewers and working your way up the ladder to associate editors and then becoming editors. You know, I'm very proud to say that when I was JCD editor, I inherited a great ship from my previous editor, Skip Niles, and create, you know, and he got the journal momentum in terms of getting an impact factor, and I was able to build it from there. One of the things that I did is I did a special issue on single case research design to get people to think about different methodologies. And so I also have a very broad belief about what consists of counseling research. In a time that we are dealing with so much racialized trauma, and racialized trauma or victims of racialized trauma are not necessarily coming to our counseling offices, we still need to study the construct and study how it's affecting people. And so not all of our research may be based out of office or be clinical. And I think we have to be open to broadening our research that talks about the human condition. So if we're truly going to be advocates of social justice and multiculturalism, we need to talk about the human condition. And when people ask me, what are the trends that I see in counseling research, not only the replication crisis and the impact of our field, but also looking at the impact that racialized trauma is going to be playing in mental health. So what are some of your favorite research textbooks or resources that might be, help with research design and statistical analysis? I really like my book. That's horrible. But I wrote a research text on research and counseling, or counseling research, a practitioner scholar approach. But in terms of statistics, you know, some of the best stuff you can find right now is on the web in terms of tutorials. Take a look at my YouTube channel, and you'll see a plethora of tutorials on statistics and how to run them in SPSS and JASP. JASP is an open source software that runs statistics very much the same way that SPSS does, except it's open source. It's free, and so you never have to worry about your license going away. So, but I think that's a good resource. I really like Pituch, P-I-T-U-C-H, and Stevens, but their textbook is like, I don't know, like 2006, I think. But it's a pretty good one. It's very readable to me, but that might be a good resource as well. But I'd seriously, so many good tutorials on the web. Andy Fields does a lot of good work and has a great textbook as well. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions or comments. The timing is perfect. We are at 40 minutes past the hour, so you can have timed that more perfectly. We're at the end. So thank you so much. This is a very enlightening information, and we appreciate you and Dr. Livingston being here and especially you, Dr. Balkin, to present. And thank you to those who attended our sessions today. We have additional sessions coming up, so do check your app, and we look forward to seeing you at the top of next hour. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.